I was falsely accused of cheating by the star of the school, and on my birthday my childhood friend Lucas brought him to reconcile. We had been classmates, there was no need to hold a grudge. In fact, there was no need. So I threw away his birthday gift. I destroyed everything related to him and completely withdrew from his world. I intended to have no further relationship with him. However, at a business banquet years later, he saw me in the crowd with a single glance. In front of everyone, my childhood friend, surrounded by admiration, had tears in his eyes. "Did you have fun? You have been avoiding me for a whole 7 years." During recess, the entrance to the classroom was crowded with people, all straining their necks to look inside. In just one recess, the news that Esteban from Class 3 had falsely accused a classmate of cheating had spread throughout the school. Esteban was standing by the desk with a severe expression. The desk was kicked and twisted. Many people surrounded him to comfort him, but their gazes kept turning towards me. I was the classmate who had been falsely accused. Esteban was the class president. Maybe he misjudged the situation in the interest of order. We all make mistakes. It's just a misunderstanding, not something unforgivable. Right? As soon as these words were spoken, many others nodded in agreement. Looking at me, they all waited for me to step forward to comfort Esteban. Upon finding their expectant gazes, my heart sank. The feeling of being excluded resurfaced. The school had classes divided by academic performance, and Class 3, being the best class in the entire grade, was where I had struggled to get into. Esteban had always had a good reputation. Handsome, warm, and known as the school heartthrob. Everyone normally pretended to be united, showing a facade of camaraderie, but when real problems arose, no one defended someone like me who had been transferred midway. I bit my lip, unwilling to give up. Esteban owes me an apology. They wanted to say more, but Esteban suddenly looked at me. His face was dark, and his tone was extremely harsh. All right, it was my fault. I shouldn't have spoken for the sake of the class and discipline. I'm sorry. Is that enough, Mariana? His attitude was full of extreme reluctance. Before I could respond, he suddenly stood up and left the classroom. Then, an outburst of exclamations was heard from outside. Feeling that something was wrong, I followed him outside the classroom and saw Esteban surrounded by a group of people. He was bent over, clutching his ankle, with beads of sweat forming on his forehead, his face pale. Voices filled my ears. Esteban's parents had just been in a car accident, and he had been emotionally unstable. Does he really need to be pressured so much? I can't believe it. Is an apology so important? The area around me cleared, and I stood there in confusion. I looked up and met Paula's gaze, who had just come out of the office. Paula had beautiful eyes, usually cold when looking at others, but with me there was always a touch of warmth. But now those eyes were filled with evident reproach. In an instant I understood. Paula was blaming me too. Esteban lost his balance and stumbled on the stairs. Paula immediately helped him go to the nurse's office, with his arm resting on Paula's shoulder. Esteban looked at me coldly. His expression filled with mockery was, in fact, a mockery. In that instant, I felt he had seen through me. Esteban had uncovered my unconfessed feelings from Paula. He was completely convinced that the accusation was intentional. After returning from the nurse's office, Paula came to find me. The afternoon wind tousled the ends of her hair as she leaned against the railing, turning her head to look at me. "Is it really that important to you, just one word?" Her tone was the usual one. Nothing seemed different, but I could feel it. She was blaming me just like everyone else. A knot formed in my throat, leaving me speechless. After a long pause, I lowered my eyes to meet hers, forcing a bitter smile. "I don't understand. How did his act of playing the victim make me the one who did something wrong?" Paula looked at me, surprised for a moment. Perhaps my bitter smile was too difficult to bear because the tension in Paula's expression relaxed. "What act? He really hurt his ankle. And besides, I never said you were wrong." Paula looked away. "I just think there's no need to make a big fuss. The school bell rang urgently, and each ring sank my heart deeper and deeper. I stood still, looking at Paula in silence, and an inexplicable feeling of betrayal engulfed me. Was it really about not making a fuss, or was it something else? When school ended, Paula was gone. Esteban's seat was also empty. Someone told me that Paula had something to do and asked me to go home alone. I nodded and responded with an "oh," feeling a mix of emotions that I couldn't name. On the way home, groups of people walked together, laughing and chatting. I rode my bike with my head down, and for some reason, memories began to overwhelm me. In our old neighborhood, Paula's name was well known. Everyone knew that, although Paula had a cold temperament, she was fiercely protective. Whenever I got into a fight with someone, Paula was always the first to rush to my side, even without knowing the details. I lost my parents at a young age and was raised by my grandmother in that old neighborhood. Paula often followed me around, calling me big sister this and big sister that, but gradually she started to awkwardly avoid those terms. She began to call me by my full name, Mariana Liu. I looked at her lazily while she carried her school backpack. "Your wings have grown stronger, and now you dare to call me by my name?" It was as if she'd been caught. She looked down and murmured, "What big sister? You're only a few days older than me." As if deliberately challenging me. She puffed up her cheeks and yelled, "I'll call you Mariana, 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 Mariana." Paula thought I would scold her as I used to, so she quickly turned and ran, but I didn't. I stood there for a while, resigned, and said, "Fine, fine, I can't control you anymore." Then I laughed softly. After all, I never liked being called big sister. When I came to my senses, the sky had already darkened. The distance between the school and home wasn't much, but during that ride, I must have turned around 108 times like a spinning top. On the dimly lit road, no familiar figure ever appeared. The next day, Paula waited for me as usual to go to school together. It seemed like nothing had changed, but on the way, I couldn't help but casually ask Paula why she had come so late yesterday. Paula explained indifferently that something had delayed her. She didn't give a reason, but soon I found out why. As soon as I entered the classroom, I saw Esteban looking at Paula and smiling. "Good morning, Paula. By the way, thank you for accompanying me home yesterday." I stood frozen in place, slowly lifting my head to look at Esteban. He had a charming smile, but I had never found a smile so irritating. I had heard about this before transferring to Class 3. Esteban and Paula were quite close. I wanted to act like I didn't care, but I couldn't fool myself. I cared a lot. So this something Paula mentioned was accompanying Esteban home. I pressed my lips together, feeling a wave of anger. I didn't talk to Paula the whole day. During a recess, Esteban suddenly approached me and placed a cup of water on my desk. I turned my head, but before I could react, the sound of shattering glass was heard. Suddenly, Esteban's voice echoed in the classroom. Many people turned to look, and the room instantly fell into an awkward silence. Esteban's face darkened, and he incredulously looked at the shattered cup on the floor, his voice irritated. "I just wanted to apologize for the other day. Buddy, the cup had shattered and water splashed everywhere." Esteban took a deep breath and turned to me helplessly. Let's say I didn't hold it well. But the more he explained, the more attention fell on me. I had become familiar with the meaning behind those looks. I looked at Esteban, and suddenly everything made sense. It was the same old trick. More than anything, I hated being falsely accused. In the brief pause while Esteban pretended to be helpless, I suddenly grabbed him and started walking towards the teacher's office. "Stop pretending." I didn't even touch the cup. "Let's check the security cameras." Esteban froze for a second, his face turning pale. He refused to go. A great commotion was created. Through a few steps, someone suddenly stopped me. "That's enough." I frowned and looked down, only to see Paula's face. It was as if they had poured a bucket of ice-cold water over me. I was frozen to the bone. Paula hadn't talked to me all day, but the first thing she said was to defend Esteban. She knew very well that Esteban was doing all this for her. He looked at me. His expression was a mix of impatience and helplessness. "Don't make a scene." It's almost time for class. There it was again. That carefree attitude, just a few casual words. And she was already siding with Esteban. The anger I had been building up since last night overflowed uncontrollably. My face darkened instantly, and I lightly pushed Paula. Paula, do you find this funny? Why should I continue to allow Esteban to slander me? Are you going to say again that it's unnecessary? Yes, it may not matter to you, but it's very important to me. My sudden outburst left Paula stunned for a couple of seconds. She looked at me blankly, as if she hadn't expected such a strong reaction from me. After a while, she blinked and spoke through tears. I didn't mean that. I insisted on reviewing the security cameras, but Esteban tried to stop me. I dropped it by accident. There's no need to bother the teacher over something so trivial. As things stood, anyone could see that the problem was not with me. Many of those who had defended Esteban before didn't say anything this time. I sat back down, feeling extremely irritated. Paula passed me a bottle of cold water, looking down as she stared at me. Mariana, I didn't mean that. I ignored her. Over the next few days, Paula stayed close to me. We rarely argued, but after school I turned around and left. And it seemed Paula had finally had enough. Suddenly she grabbed me by the sleeve. Her hand was cold and there was a new expensive watch on her wrist. It was the same watch I had looked at online a couple of times. Too expensive for me to even think about buying. Even for someone like Paula, who came from a well-off family. It wasn't something that would be bought lightly. I stood there frozen, looking at Paula as she looked at me. Please don't be mad at me. Yes, without thinking, I tried to take it off to return it to her, but Paula stopped me. I wanted to give it to you anyway, but it's still a bit early since your birthday isn't here yet. She still wore a serious face, but I felt my anger fading. When I got home, I cursed myself for being so weak. Just as I finished, the phone suddenly rang. My aunt's voice came through the line, asking me if I had thought about changing schools and when I planned to move. I looked at the watch on my wrist and quietly said, I want to stay a little longer since my grandmother passed away. The only reason I stayed here was Paula. Over the following days, Paula didn't mention Esteban in front of me. I thought we were done with him, but then, on my birthday, I heard something. Paula had been hanging out with Esteban every day after school. My heart sank in an instant. The thunder rumbled in the sky. I went out a lot on my birthday. Paula was supposed to pick up the cake, but something came up last minute and asked me to do it. I wanted to ask for more details over the phone, but she quickly hung up. I calmed myself, thinking I could ask her in person when we met. After picking up the cake, I stepped out only to discover that the rain had intensified. To make matters worse, my car had broken down. The place where Paula had planned the party wasn't very far. I held an umbrella in one hand and carried the cake in the other as I hurried towards the place. But even so, I ended up soaking quite a bit. Paula rarely asked me to pick up the cake myself on my birthday. She probably had something more important to do. I kept comforting myself with this thought until I arrived at the door, but from the room I clearly heard Esteban's voice. I stood frozen in place, listening to his voice coming from the entrance, laced with laughter. He told me, thanks to our Paulina for agreeing to pick me up in this heavy rain. The door was ajar. I stood there for a second, awkwardly raising my gaze, only to discover that everyone else had already arrived. There were even some unfamiliar faces present. Among the crowd, I saw the person I wanted to see the least. It wasn't my imagination. Esteban was really there. Someone must have noticed me because a voice called out, and suddenly all eyes turned to me. My disheveled appearance was exposed to everyone, and for a moment the room fell silent uncomfortably. Esteban also turned to look, standing quietly next to Paula. His clothes were clean and tidy, in stark contrast to mine. Water dripped from my sleeves. I stood there, drenched, holding the cake in front of everyone. I felt like a clown with nowhere to hide. I had never felt so humiliated before. Rage boiled within me as I looked at Paula, grinding my teeth. I asked her, Why is Esteban here? Paula hadn't expected to see me like this, and her face changed immediately. I felt my fury trapped in my chest, ready to explode with a single word. I looked at Paula without moving, repeating my question. Why is Esteban here? Have you been with him all these days? Did you come here with him today too? The water had come perfectly dry, and on my birthday I was the laughingstock, soaked and humiliated in front of everyone. Paula knew how much I disliked Esteban. I had said it more than once. I didn't want to see Esteban anymore. Why did it have to be today? Why did it have to be when I was at my lowest point? Paula stood there, dazed. She tried to explain hurriedly. Esteban said he wanted to formally apologize to you today, and he invited many people to witness it. He even prepared a birthday gift. So I thought. Paula suddenly grabbed my wrist tightly. I wanted to clarify the misunderstanding today. Esteban is really a good guy. There's no need to hold a grudge. There's no need. Again, no need. In fact, there was no need. I looked at Paula, silently pulling her fingers off my wrist. Then I took off the watch from my wrist and threw it at her. Once again, I didn't press her with questions nor said anything at all. Something I had clung to for so long suddenly no longer seemed valuable to me. The day I left, I didn't tell Paula. It was just an ordinary afternoon when I definitively put an end to things with Paula. My aunt helped me with the transfer paperwork. She mentioned that when my name was mentioned, a boy suddenly ran out of class, his voice choking with tears. He was repeatedly where I had transferred. My aunt asked me if he was a good friend. I shook my head and smiled. He's no longer. My aunt didn't tell Paula. Paula wouldn't be able to find me. Mariana, how can you be so relaxed? Aren't you nervous? The boss said tonight's dinner will be full of important people from the industry. My colleague David's voice pulled me back to reality. The banquet hall in front of me was lively, brightly lit, and incredibly luxurious. 7 years had passed since I transferred schools. After the transfer, I became completely immersed in my studies. Without distractions, I exceeded expectations in college entrance exams. After graduating, I seamlessly entered this company. I snapped out of my thoughts. I paused for a second. Don't worry. There's nothing for small ones like us to stress about. You call yourself small? You climb to a position in 3 years that most don't reach in 10. Just as he finished speaking, a sudden uproar arose at the front of the hall. Amid it all, I thought I could hear some mentions of Miss Liu. David gulped nervously beside me. Miss Liu is a rich heiress. Not only is her family wealthy, but she is also successfully running her own company. And she is here. Slowly, I frowned. Something clicked in my mind. I looked up. All I could see was a beautiful figure surrounded by people. The tailored dress, simple yet elegant, which she wore was clearly expensive at first glance. That profile felt overwhelmingly familiar. Mariana. A voice shattered all my thoughts. There were many people around her trying to strike up conversation, but her gaze pierced through the crowd, landing on me in front of everyone. She even began to walk towards me, step by step. Did you have fun? Paula stared at me, her eyes red, avoiding me for these entire 7 years. The hall fell silent, and almost all gazes fixed on me. There were whispers. People evaluated me. Everyone tried to figure out how someone like me, a low-level employee, could be related to Paula. I lowered my head in resignation and met Paula's gaze. It seemed she had changed over the years, but in some ways she hadn't changed at all. The youthful innocence was gone. After years of navigating society, she now radiated an aura that made her hard to approach. Today's Paula was someone most people would approach to say a few kind words. I took a step back, increasing the distance between us, and watched her silently. Through all these years, I felt the same as I did 7 years ago. There wasn't much I wanted to say. Perhaps my withdrawal was too evident, as Paula suddenly froze in place. She lifted her gaze towards me, her voice trembling. Are you still going to avoid me? The boss was not very far away, blinking rapidly as if he were pressing the shutter on a camera. His insinuations were painfully clear. Over the years, I had dealt with many people, and saying the right words for the occasion had become second nature. But I didn't want to please in front of Paula. I simply asked her, "What status do you have that would make it worth avoiding you?" My words made many faces in the room change. Paula's expression also slightly paled. "What status?" Paula stared at me, a mix of resentment and pain in her eyes. She dried the tears from the corners of her eyes and quietly asked, "Mariana, do you want me to help you remember?" Remember what? Remember how she clearly sided with Esteban that year? Or remember that miserable birthday under the pouring rain? The feelings of humiliation and frustration I had deeply buried began to resurface, suppressing my emotions. I let out a couple of cold laughs and spoke with a touch of bitterness. "Paula." I looked up at her sincerely asking, "And who are you to me?" Paula had probably been so successful over these years that it had elevated her too much. She frowned, the anger evident in her eyes. "Can you repeat that?" The atmosphere tensed. The boss took advantage of the moment. He stepped in between us and discreetly pushed me outside. Cold wind outside dissipated my emotions. I didn't expect to still be able to get mad at Paula. David caught up to me and offered me a bottle of water. Speaking nervously, "Mr. Liu looked really scary a moment ago." "How do you know him?" Cold sensation of water sliding down my throat only added to my weariness. "That's all for tonight. I'm going home. Do me a favor and tell the boss." I had barely reached the parking lot when a message from David appeared. "You're not here?" And Mr. Liu left without looking back. "Is it possible he's coming to look for you?" I slightly frowned behind me. I could faintly hear the hurried sound of heels hitting the ground. Paula had caught up with me. She was out of breath from running, her chest heaving as she looked at me, feeling hurt. "How can you leave without saying anything? Are you going to disappear in silence again?" I looked at her silently, unwilling to speak, but my calm attitude seemed to ignite something in Paula. Her emotions began to crumble. "Have you been avoiding me for 7 years and have nothing to say to me?" I corrected her. "I wasn't avoiding you." "Then why did you leave without a word? Why did you change schools without telling me? If I hadn't come to look for you, would you really have planned to never see me again?" Leaning against the car, I let out a laugh. Who remembers such old and insignificant things? That phrase seemed to deeply wound Paula. She stared at me and suddenly tears began to gather in her eyes. "Don't you remember? Mariana, who gave you the right to forget?" Her words hit hard, like a heavy blow straight to the heart of 17-year-old Mariana. I forced a cold laugh from my throat, looking at Paula. "And who gave me the reason to remember?" "Paula, who do you think you are? Why should I remember those moments of absolute humiliation and shame? I'm nobody, of course." Paula's face paled as she cried, "But I don't allow you to forget." Not wanting to continue this conversation, I turned to leave. But Paula blocked my way. I thought I could control my emotions, but seeing Paula in that self-sufficient state, I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Paula looked at me, stubborn and hurt. "Do you know how long I've been looking for you? Do you know how happy I was to see you today?" She didn't finish the sentence before a loud noise broke the silence of the parking lot. I turned towards the noise and saw Esteban in the distance, although I didn't realize when he had arrived. Something had shattered on the ground. Esteban stood still, staring at us, still holding Paula's coat. Esteban had been beside Paula all these years. The two attended the same university. After graduating, Esteban joined Paula's company. This time, Paula hadn't brought him. He came on his own, wanting to surprise her. He stared at her intently, his face darkened with anger. His current expression reminded me so much of Esteban from years ago. I looked back at Paula and let out a sarcastic laugh. The irony was too evident, and Paula's face turned completely pale. Esteban stepped closer, irritation and disdain in his eyes, but still forced a smile and greeted me. He said, "It's been a long time. Mariana, you left school without saying a word, making it impossible for me to apologize properly." While speaking, he naturally hooked his arm around Paula's, clearly marking his territory. Just like before, it seemed Esteban hadn't changed at all over the years. But this time, before I could respond, Paula suddenly withdrew her arm, looked at Esteban, her voice soft as she asked him, "Esteban, didn't I tell you that if you wanted to stay in the company, you should stop saying inappropriate things?" With those words, Esteban's face turned as white as a sheet of paper, but he still tried to grab Paula's wrist. "Paula, are you still upset about what happened last time? I won't do it again. Let's not make a scene. We can talk about this when we get back. Okay?" I was terrified that Paula would say something in my presence. Paula stepped away from him, then looked at me and explained. "Something happened years ago and Esteban saved my family, so my mom placed him in the company. Don't say any more." Esteban suddenly interrupted, his voice low and tense. "Don't treat me like this. Let's go back. Okay?" Paula ignored him and finished her sentence. "I and Esteban never had a relationship." Paula's explanations and Esteban's irritated voice filled my mind. The scene of the reunion was so chaotic it gave me a headache. They seemed to be saying a lot, but I really didn't pay much attention. I just remember that when the headache worsened and I wanted to leave, Paula suddenly grabbed my wrist. She looked at me stubbornly. Tears rolled down her face. "So you're going to stick with her version without even asking me? And assume that I was the one who hit first?" I let go of her hand. "If you want to talk, we can do it after work." Camila turned and smiled disdainfully at Paula. Paula stayed until the end of the workday. She stood there with her bruised face, not treating it, stubbornly waiting until night came. I left the company with Camila. Paula approached, about to speak, when Camila suddenly let out another soft "ouch," stretching her hand towards me. "Mariana, my hand hurts. I don't think I can drive." Seeing that hand, Paula suddenly felt her face burn. Then, as if realizing something, she stepped forward and looked at me. "You promised me we would talk." Camila looked down. "I can bear the pain. If you have something to do, it's okay. You don't need to take me home." I looked at Camila. "I'll take you home first." Paula stood frozen, looking at me in surprise. The light in her eyes gradually faded away. "On the way," Camila confessed to me. "Mariana, I was actually the one who hit first. She treated you like this before. Now it's her turn to know what it feels like not to be trusted." "I understand." I looked at her. "But don't ever use that method again. It would be a pity to damage that face." Camila was surprised. Then she smiled with her eyes curved. "All right." I returned. The sky was already dark, and Paula stood there in the shadows, completely alone for some reason. Seeing her that way reminded me of an abandoned animal, but Paula was never mine to begin with. I looked at her. "Through all this, let's clarify things. Tell me what you have to say. I wasn't the one who hit first today." Paula fell silent for a moment before uttering those words. I didn't expect Paula to still be concerned about that. "It doesn't matter." "Get to the point." "It doesn't matter." Paula insisted, staring at me stubbornly. "Mariana, you were never this partial before." The word "before" floated in the air. So long ago. People change over time. Besides now, for me, Camila is not someone else. You are. The sky was almost completely dark. The night was cold. Paula stood there, softly repeating the word as if savoring it on her tongue. "Someone else." Camila slowly closed her eyes and forced a smile. When she spoke again, her voice was choked. "A few days before your birthday. After school. I was with Esteban because he kept asking me to help him apologize to you. I knew you didn't like seeing him, so I didn't tell you. On your birthday." Esteban said he had already bought a birthday gift and had invited many people. He just wanted to sincerely apologize. So I helped him. All these years, I never had anything to do with Esteban. After finishing her explanation, Paula lifted her gaze. Her eyes met mine, reflecting my image. She waited silently for my response. Okay. I don't understand, I said, adjusting my coat. Is that it? Then let's go home. It's cold. Paula looked at me. Her eyes suddenly filled with tears. Her pale face. Her voice so dry and tense I could barely hear her speak. I turned around and began to walk away. I heard a low, soft voice behind me. It was full of pain and sadness. It said, I can't. After that, the Porsche no longer appeared near the company. But each morning, a flower shop showed up at the office to deliver flowers. Mr. Liu, these flowers were freshly cut. Have a nice day. At noon, no one brought lunch especially for me. David approached me. Isn't this our favorite restaurant? Super expensive. The restaurant staff smiled. Mr. Liu is one of our most exclusive VIP clients. If you have any favorite ingredients, feel free to let us know at any time. And it wasn't just this restaurant. Every place I had visited had me registered as a VIP in my name. Even the mortgage on my current house had been paid in advance by someone. Every gesture. I needed to think a lot to know who was behind it. Paula, David said, with his eyes wide open as he struggled to find the words. She's really wealthy. I tried to contact her several times to return the money. Each time, Paula returned it. She said it was compensation for the guilt she felt from the past. The next time I saw Paula was on the company outing. The boss mentioned that there would be a rare meteor shower that night. The best place to see it would be exactly where we were. Throughout the trip, David and Camila didn't stop chatting, making my ears hurt. Finally, we arrived at the destination and things calmed down a bit. But of course I saw Paula. She was standing not far away, in the wind, with her usual cold and distant demeanor, warning people to stay away. Paula, who had cried with red eyes that night, seemed a dream. She looked at me from afar. She smiled and said, "What a coincidence." Camila, grilling skewers, let out a laugh. "Miss Liu, that's a good joke. Her company is miles away from here." "That's right," Paula nodded. "But the branch is nearby." "When did she open a branch here?" Paula replied calmly. "Just a moment ago." Camila rolled her eyes. Ridiculous. Paula wasn't joking. Her branch was really about to be established nearby. But saying she brought employees for an outing seemed a bit unbelievable. Among the group, I could still see Esteban. However, he seemed more restrained, looking at Paula but not approaching as before. Paula approached to chat with the boss. The boss always wanted to collaborate with Paula's company, so he didn't refuse the opportunity. While they spoke, the conversation centered around the supplies Paula had brought. Paula had been extravagant, bringing double the supplies our company had. Paula took the opportunity and suggested, "Why don't we join together? It'll be livelier." The boss readily agreed. Camila teased, "Paula is obviously here for Mariana." The boss gave her a light smack on the head. "Do you think I don't know? It's a free offer, why not take advantage of it?" Camila handed the boss a burnt skewer. "Isn't that selling out?" The boss sighed. "Haven't you realized yet? Mariana has already moved on. 2 companies joined, making the event livelier." But no matter what she did, Paula always came closer to help. She took the skewers from my hand, the oil sizzling, and asked, "How have you been lately?" I replied, "Everything has been good, that's good." While talking with Paula, I could feel Esteban's gaze fixed on me. Later, he found an excuse to approach and talk to me. I thought he had changed until the hot soup spilled on his hand just like 7 years ago. Then I realized he hadn't grown up at all. The noise drew everyone's attention. People from both companies looked at each other, unsure of what to say. Esteban probably wanted to repeat the same tactics, trying to make my life difficult in the company. He had succeeded before. I never fit in class 3. But now, before he could say anything, David and Camila rushed over. Seriously, isn't that enough? Come on, if you're going to frame someone, at least choose the right setting. This is our company's territory. Do you really think you can mess with Mariana? And even if Mariana did it, you probably deserved it. The voices surrounded him from all sides. Things were not going as he imagined. And Esteban stood there frozen, his words stuck in his throat. His face darkened, and he turned to look at his own company. But Paula stepped in front of him. She looked at Esteban, her voice as cold as ice. Esteban, when we return to the office, submit your resignation and move to another city. As soon as she said that, no one spoke in Esteban's defense. All color drained from Esteban's face. I picked up a cold bottle of water nearby and poured it over his head. With a loud splash, the water soaked him. Esteban trembled violently. He looked at me with disbelief in his eyes. I looked at him and smiled, telling him, "This time it was really me. You've been dying for me to throw something on you. So how could I not accommodate you? After a day of cold wind, we couldn't see the meteor shower. When Paula went to find a scarf, the darkness around us was too dense, and she twisted her ankle when she lost her step. She sat down on the ground, pale. When I realized what had happened, Paula had already grabbed my wrist. The mountain path was too steep for cars to climb. Paula's voice trembled from pain. It hurts so much. Please help me. I sighed and finally carried her on my back down the mountain. The night air was cold, and Paula was in so much pain that a thin film of sweat formed on her forehead as she clung to my back. She asked me through the pain if I was too heavy. Her voice trembled, filled with the same sadness and pain that night. For a moment, it merged with the voice of younger Paula, making me feel dizzy. I told her, not much. Paula, trying to distract herself from the pain, talked about many things. She mentioned many things from our childhood, things I knew and things I didn't know. She also asked me if I remembered the watch I had given her before her birthday. I never got around to asking her how Paula knew she liked that watch. Paula laughed softly, saying she had noticed when she first looked at it and that she had been planning it for a long time. That watch, she said, was still carefully kept in her drawer. I felt a lump in my throat and kept my gaze on the dark path ahead of me. Without saying anything, Paula continued, telling me that on her birthday, when she plunged into the rain without looking back, she was about to run after him when she received a call. There was an emergency at home. She hurried back and was overwhelmed with problems in the following days. She had planned to find me and discuss things as soon as she finished. Back then, she wouldn't have done anything to make me angry, no matter what she said. But when she finished her matters, I had suddenly vanished. Her calls were blocked, and suddenly she had no way to contact me. Paula let out a soft, bitter laugh while recounting this. Her voice was filled with a mixture of resentment and guilt. She said she changed schools without a word, not even a goodbye. I kept my eyes low, not knowing what to say, and tried to change the topic, just as she had done. I told her, "Stop making me a VIP everywhere and don't pay off my mortgage, I'll pay you back little by little." Paula suddenly fell silent. After a long pause, she spoke in a rough voice. "Do you really not want anything to do with me?" I replied, "I don't want to owe anyone anything. The Liu family took care of me a lot back then. Let's leave it at that. Nobody owes anything to anyone." Paula shook her head, saying she didn't want that. Cold wind howled in my ears. I could hear Paula's voice trembling. I sighed. After a moment of silence, I told her, "Soon I am going to leave this city to manage the branch." Paula, still on my back, stiffened suddenly. The wind was too cold. Paula took a deep breath and her tears began to fall again. Her voice mixed with the wind, every word accompanied by deep breaths. "Are you leaving again?" I replied softly, "Yes." After that, Paula didn't say anything more. She remained silent, not speaking again, but continued to wipe her tears. I took Paula to the hospital, taking care of everything from start to finish. The hospital room was so quiet that only our breathing could be heard. Paula lay on the bed, looking at me without moving. It was as if she was trying to engrave my image in her mind after what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke, smiling as she asked, "When will you return?" But that smile was painfully forced. I said to her, "Who knows? Maybe I'll return. If things go well, maybe I'll never come back." Paula's eyelashes trembled slightly. Her eyes were filled with a sadness I had never seen before. "So, will we see each other again?" I looked out the window and shook my head gently. "Probably not." Upon saying those words, the light in Paula's eyes extinguished completely into darkness. She lowered her head and cried for a long, long time. Finally, she managed to utter a weak, "It's okay." The day I left the city, it began to snow. The air was filled with a cutting cold. I knew Paula was somewhere not far behind me. Dependency is a dangerous thing. I had already fallen once and had hurt myself a lot. When I chose to leave back then, I never intended for things to return to how they used to be. The idea of repairing a broken mirror is simply too unrealistic. I would never throw myself back into the storm of my teenage years. I grabbed my suitcase. Step by step, I walked forward. I never looked back.